معرفة.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So this is an Ijara, and what are the main features of an Ijara? To start with, the first important principle in an Ijara contract is the subject matter. So the subject matter of the Ijara contract must be Sharia compliant. So the asset which is used to lease must be Sharia compliant. So this is one important point which one has to keep in mind. Now the second point, let us discuss about the usufruct or benefit. So basically, the usufruct which is passed by the lessor to the lessee, okay, after receiving the consideration in the form of lease or the rental, that usufruct, okay, is an important feature. So this usufruct needs to be properly transferred by the lessor. This usufruct, that is the benefit which is to be derived from the asset, first of all needs to exist in the asset. Okay, so meaning to say, for example, a barren piece of land cannot be leased because there's no benefit in a barren piece of land. So there has to be certain benefit in the asset when that asset is being put into an Ijara transaction, or that asset is used, okay, to build an Ijara transaction. So the other important point is that when the subject matter or when the asset is being leased, that asset needs to have a usufruct or benefit, and that benefit needs to be properly transferred from the lessor to the lessee. Now let us discuss about the third principle, which is related to the rent. So the lease rent. So what we have seen is that in Ijara transactions, the rents are paid on a periodic basis. There could be, generally an Ijara from a commercial point of view is entered into because in an Ijara transaction there could be a floating rate option, meaning to say that after every lease period the rent can be renewed, can be changed. So the Ijara could be agreed on a fixed rentals, or it can be agreed on a floating rentals. But one main point which needs to be kept in mind is that when the lease rent has been agreed for a period of time, then it cannot be changed. But what can be changed is the future rentals. So both the parties can agree that after every 6 months the rentals can be renewed or agreed upon by both the parties. So that is agreed. But if a rent has been agreed, for example, for 6 months, that this will be the lease rent. But if the rentals have been agreed, then those rentals cannot be changed, cannot be altered once it has been agreed upon. But the future rentals can be changed. So one important point with respect to lease rent is that the lease rent has to be agreed between both the parties, that is the lessor and the lessee. The lease rentals can be changed, but only after the existent rental has been finished. So for example, if an asset has been leased for 5 years and the parties agree that every 6 months the rent would be renewed, then at the time of the new rent, the rental value can be changed. So at the time of the new rate, okay, the future rentals can be changed, but the agreed ones cannot be changed. So this is with respect to the lease rentals. The lease rentals, of course, there are two ways generally in the Ijara transaction. One is it could be amortized, meaning to say that every lease rental will have a component of the profit portion and a component of the principal portion. Or It could be, for example, in sukuk transactions, what we have seen is that only the profit amount is paid, okay, during the whole term, and then the principal amount is at the end purchased between the, or transferred between the parties. Now, the other principle, let us discuss with relation to concluding of Ijara. So of course, an Ijara contract, like the other contracts in Islamic transactions, are concluded after the offer and acceptance between both the parties. One important point which needs to be kept in mind with reference to Ijara is that the Ijara can be entered into, but the obligation by the lessee to pay the rentals will start only when the asset has been delivered by the lessor to the lessee. Meaning to say, the commencement of the obligation by the lessee to pay the rentals will start only when the lessee has received the asset. And this is an important point. So the asset has to reach the lessee, and the lessee has to start the using or benefiting from the asset. Basically, one important point with reference to the conclusion of Ijara agreement is that, of course, there has to be an offer and acceptance between both the parties. The other important point is that the rent commences from the actual delivery date, meaning to say that only when the lessor has delivered the asset to the lessee, from then on the rent payment commences, or the obligation starts. Now just let us quickly understand how we can apply the principles which we have just discussed to an Ijara transactional flow. So the first principle is that the assets or the subject matter has to be Sharia compliant. So in this case, for example, the requirement of the customer is a house. So the subject matter is Sharia compliant. So the bank approaches the seller, makes the payment, purchases an asset which is Sharia compliant. Then the second is usufruct or benefit, meaning to say that this house has to be in a condition that somebody can live in this house, somebody can benefit from this house. So there has to be that element of benefit in the house. If the house is in a non-usable form, then it cannot be leased to the customer or the lessee. So we need to check that principle. Now, if that is okay and the house is in a proper condition to be leased, then that house is leased to the customer through a lease contract. And then what happens? An important point is that for the rents to commence, the asset has to reach or deliver. The asset has to be delivered to the lessee. So this asset needs to be delivered to the lessee for the rental payments to commence. And the contract of Ijara, as we have discussed, it is basically an offer and acceptance. And with reference to rentals, these rentals, as we have agreed, they can be fixed or floating, and every rental period, okay, the rental amount needs to be agreed between both the parties, okay, for each rental period. If there is an option which exists, there is an option for both the lessor and the lessee to change the rental periods. But what has been agreed upon cannot be changed. But the future rentals can be changed. So that point is an important point. We have also discussed that in case of delay in the payment by the lessee, the rental amounts cannot be changed. But there can be a late payment fee which can be charged by the Islamic bank, but that late payment fee needs to be given to the charity. The last point which we have discussed is with reference to the transfer of ownership. So at the end of the lease term, there is an option in the arrangement that the lessee can purchase the underlying assets back from the lessor and pay certain nominal amount or an amount which has been agreed upon by both the parties. So these are certain important principles in an Ijara transaction.